have Dr. Ebner come and speak now.
Okay, so yes, I would like to also thank the organizers and Shannon in particular very much for the opportunity for us to be here and present some of our work and discuss it with you. I'm a professor at the University of Florida here in town, so it's a home play for me. I also have a collaborator here. My postdoc Didem is somewhere in the room, and Brian Cahill, a lecturer in our department, are here as well. They're also involved in the research that I'm presenting to you today. So what I'm going to do is to take you into a different realm of where scamming can happen. And we have touched on this already during the morning. And really where I'm coming from as a professor of aging research is that aging is not a phenomenon that's just stable. As we go through the decades and centuries, life changes for an middle-aged and older adult. I mean, for one, we're getting older than we used to as a species, but also every cohort experiences a very different environment. And what the aging population is now experiencing is the cyberspace, which is pretty new in terms of space to navigate in. And so it's really, in my view, a rethinking of adulthood and aging in this pretty unsafe cyberspace, digital era. And so we have the aging decision maker now in this new context. And we wonder as scientists, is there this particular vulnerability, not only in this one-on-one interpersonal interactions that we have in everyday life when it comes to trust, but also in online. And what we know is that older adults make up only 20% of the US population, even though those numbers are growing, but they control a lot of the money. And they are also very often holding very important positions of power. They're making lots of the decisions about finances, health, and politics for themselves, but also for society at large. And so understanding the aging decision maker is very crucial for science, but then also for translation into policy and applications. And as I said, the direction we're taking in my lab is to look at the decision maker in the cyberspace, and specifically looking at fraud risk, cyber fraud risk. We're focused particularly on phishing, but that's just one angle. It's basically a malicious email with the intent to lure the receiver into clicking on a link to provide some additional information about themselves, passwords, bank accounts, whatever it is. Or to download something. It can be through a link or through an attachment onto your computer that affects your computer, and then through your computer, other computers that your computer is connected with. We know from statistics out there that phishing emails are still on the rise. I mean, the nature of them changes a little bit, and that's actually something that's very important to understand when we think about research and also policy and application in these fields. It's a very fast-growing phenomena. I mean, we heard these examples of like scams evolving, becoming better and better pretty much every day. And as we're trying to hit back and to protect and prevent, we have to understand this dynamic nature of things. So right now, the statistics look like 1 in 400 emails is a phishing email, is malicious. I'm getting about 150 to 200 emails every day. So you can imagine one click on one of those phishing emails every 2 days could just completely mess up my computer and maybe even the whole university through my computer, right? Being connected to these other systems, other devices. So we're taking a look at the aging individual in the context of online activities. And what we have recently done is we have developed measures together with Bonnie in Miami. And we have actually submitted those measures to an ongoing data collection in Quebec, in Montreal, with a cohort that is cognitively vulnerable as they're having a family history of Alzheimer's. They're not diagnosed at start of enrollment. They were not diagnosed with Alzheimer's themselves, but they had a close relative who had been. So they were 15 years out of that age that their close relative had been diagnosed. And what we see in those folks, when we just ask them, how often do you use or do you regularly use your computing devices, regular meaning daily or almost daily. You can see here, or maybe not see, but like the blue is yes, I'm using it. So this is not something that, oh, the young folks do, you know, adolescents and young adults. Like older adults are using the internet very regularly these days. And even individuals who are cognitively or physically frail, as we have heard before as well. We also asked in that same sample, how often do you use email? Because we wanted to specifically know for our phishing approach. And here in blue, the large piece of the pie, you have very frequently, so again, very frequent use of email. So those high numbers of phishing emails, they're not only targeting the younger folks and the working force, but it's really including the older individuals as well. And so what we did in the lab as a first step to understand a little bit better what are the risks that are already out there is that we asked a sample of young and older adults to send us everything, every email that landed in their spam folder. So we just had them forward everything. This could be spam emails, phishing emails. Didn't have to be malicious, could have been benign stuff, but it was filtered in their email filters. And we spent hours and weeks and months to code those emails. We got almost 20,000 emails this way. And we had our RAs in the lab look for specific topics in those emails because we wanted to understand, are older adults targeted already in their spam in a different way than younger adults? And basically what we found in this data is that this is a proportion, so it's basically like a percentage score. We looked for, among other things, looked for different domains, health, cognition, independence, and so on and so forth. And you have here in the white bars the young adults and in the grayish bars the older adults in that study. So the targets of that spam email in real life, the things that land in your filter. And what we see was that older adults were more likely to receive health-related spam emails. Makes sense, right? Health is a very important context in old age. They also were more likely to receive emails that somehow refer to independence, again, a very important topic in older ages. They were less likely, so young adults were more likely than older adults to receive things about leisure or occupation. So really the point we want to make here with that data is that already in current spam campaigns, are older adults targeted differently from younger adults. We then took this a step further in our research and asked the question whether older adults are particularly vulnerable to deception in phishing emails. And we actually took an approach which we call an ecologically valid field approach. So we basically placed our individuals in their natural, we kept them in their natural environment at home. We didn't place them, we kept them there. So what we did is we contacted young and older adults for this study. They had no idea what the study was about. We basically told them, this will be a study about internet use. All you have to do is every day of the 3 weeks you're on the study, we want you to use the internet for 1 hour every day. You do different browsing activities, you read the news, and you also check your emails. What we did without them knowing it is we had them participate in the phishing internet task. We had a server through which we sent, unbeknownst to them, phishing emails that we had created in the lab. They were safe, they were simulated, but they completely modeled the idea of a real phishing email in real life. And it basically, our server sent those out, and our participant was sitting at home working on the computer thinking the study is about something else. Here you can see actually an example of such an email, directly addressed our participant with the name and everything, had some sort of a topic, here was an amount was due and blah, 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 you need to pay this, and there was a link there. We controlled this link, there was a website in the background of it. If they clicked on that link, we were able to record this click, which basically means you have fallen for this attack, okay? This means one click, could be something gets downloaded on your computer. So that's our susceptibility measure. And so participant received those 21 emails during the 3 weeks at different times during the day. And I was really shocked when the data came back because I never thought this would work. So remember, we have young and older adults, and among those, both those age groups, 43% of participants clicked at least on one email. So they would have infected their computer in just those 3 weeks in our study. There was a bunch of people who never clicked. As I said, a bunch of people clicked once, and then a few people clicked even more than once on more than one email. One email click is enough to affect your computer. We looked a little bit further because we had young women, young men, older women, and older men in our study, and it was particularly the older women. So it was not just a plain age effect. There was an age by sex interaction. So older women were particularly likely to click on those phishing emails, or were in the groups who had clicked on those phishing emails. What I hadn't mentioned, I just showed you the example of the phishing email. What we actually did was we systematically varied those emails in terms of weapons of influence. This is a principle or a technique that in advertising is, for example, used, but we also know by now that it's used by social engineers, by attackers online and in other contexts. It's basically a technique to persuade. There's different forms of it. One example is authority. The email comes from an IT department. Wow, must be really important. I really got to read this. I got to respond promptly, so I'm going to click on that link. They tell me to change my password. I'm going to do that right away. That's the principle of authority. Some of our emails use that principle. Others use scarcity. So coin collection from the 50s, very cheap, but only for 3 days. And after this opportunity will disappear. So you got to click now. You got to purchase this now as a collector. Tomorrow it's not going to be available anymore. Or another of those principles is reciprocation. You do something good to me, well, the least I can do is return the favor somehow, right? You sent me a like a trip for free. Here's an attachment with a brochure. I can at least take a look at it. There we go. We have something downloaded onto our computer. So there's different principles, and we had our emails, as I said, systematically varied across those principles. And what we found was that those different weapons actually were differentially effective for young and older adults. So it's not that all of those worked equally well in the different age groups. I mean, overall, scarcity and authority, two examples I've given you, worked pretty well for both young and older adults. But you see that scarcity, here the young adults are in black and the older adults are in white, worked even better for young adults than older adults. On the opposite, reciprocation or liking. So you are a pet lover, someone else is a pet lover, you feel a very strong connection, email comes from that person, oh yeah, right, I click right away. Those weapons worked a little bit better for the older adults, were more effective, more dangerous for older adults, if you will. This is the last piece of data that I have for you for today. Same study at the very end. Before we told people what the whole study was about, we gave them a set of emails that they had not received during the 21 days. We just presented those emails in front of them and we asked them, how interesting is this email? How convincing is it? Would you click on a link in an email like this? So this is basically what we call self-reported awareness of your own susceptibility. And we heard already a little bit that people say, no, never would fall for this scam, or never would do this. But I just showed you the data. They actually do. 43% of the participants do fall for these things in our study. But when we ask those same folks, would you click? Low here is, I would never click. So pretty much across the board, young and old adults, for all those different weapons that we used in the emails, oh no, I would hardly ever click on something like this. But we saw this discrepancy here, right? Behavior, yes, they did click in the study. But at the end of the study, when we asked them for similar material, they had no awareness. And this low level of personal awareness of the risk was particularly significantly low in older adults compared to younger adults. So older adults are even less aware of their risk while being highly behaviorally susceptible to those threats and attacks. Okay, I didn't say the truth when I said I had no other data. This is, promise, the last data point I have. This is actually, again, the same study in which we now looked more closely at our still younger adults, but we split the older adults into those that were a little bit younger. Everyone was over 60, but the young old versus the middle or old individuals in our sample, because we were trying to understand what is it but age? Age is a proxy. Age is not a good explanation for something. Age comes with other things. It comes with cognitive decline. It comes with socio-emotional decline, as we already heard from my colleagues. So we were interested in what are those profiles that are associated with age that make people more or less vulnerable to these email attacks. And what we found in the study was among the very old individuals, that's actually the one you see here represented in this line, it's those old individuals in our study that were not very good when it comes to memory, so very low memory scores in a measure that we had given them, and also had very low positive affect. So they didn't feel very well. We asked them every day during the study, every day, how positive or negative do you feel? And we computed a score across the 21 days, same for memory. And it was those people with those negative cognitive and the negative affective profiles that were most at risk for falling for our phishing intervention in the study. So now we're moving forward from this. This was really an attempt of demonstrating, yes, phishing, email, online activity is a realm of threat for older individuals. They're using devices online, they are falling for phishing, and are maybe less aware even of those risks. But now we have to move away from this, like Bonnie said, and Gary also emphasized. It's really about the prevention, trying to understand who are those vulnerable individuals, but then also how can we identify them early and help them early before it's too late and the damage has already been done. And what we like to propose, kind of as a summary of the research we've done so far, is an one-size-does-not-fit-all approach, because we see there are these profiles. It's not true for everyone. It's for the old who are low in cognition, low in affective profiles. It's for the women who, in the computer context, seemed in this specific study at least to have this particular vulnerability. So we can't just come up with one solution for everyone. And what we're doing right now, and we were lucky to receive also funding from NIH and other funding sources to pursue this actually together. We have different grants among all of us to go ahead with this research, is taking a closer look even at this profiling. So really trying to understand what are those socio-emotional variables, those cognitive variables, those brain features, those physiological responses we have to deceptive cues that describe higher, medium, or lower, or however we want to group it, levels of susceptibility and vulnerability to identify the very at-risk populations. And then what we want to do is we're teaming up with people from computer science and also machine learning and so on to come up with some solutions, some hands-on devices and tools. So Bonnie mentioned the on-the-spot idea. It has to be while the decision-making process is happening. It doesn't help so much to tell and then 3 weeks later you're confronted with the situation. Tools that actually happen in the moment. You're receiving an email, you have to respond to that email. You have to either click or not click. Can we develop something that is a little advisor, a little helper that supports you in that decision making? And can that tool be age-tailored? Again, it can't fit the same way for everyone. So that's the idea. And these are some of the funding sources and collaborators that have been involved in this project and will be moving forward. And so what we have prepared for the rest of this session is one slide for recommendations that we have put together based on our own research, but also on all the things we know about the field where it stands at the moment. And then we are also hoping that we can have a little bit of a discussion, questions, and all that. So I think you're going to spend just a little bit of time going over those recommendations. Yeah? Okay.
We could just take questions.
You could also just leave it here.
So we wanted to be able to take some questions from you with regard to some of our findings. I just want to say a couple things, which I think are common themes. Is that one of the things that we're all sort of sharing together with you today is that one size doesn't fit all was a really important point, that everybody has their own unique set of risk factors, that the person who's lonely and isolated may be cognitively intact, but the person surrounded by family could have a certain cognitive impairment, and that our solutions really have to come from a place of thinking about an individual, almost like a precision medicine approach to scamming. So one of our first recommendations was to establish a Florida task force to identify state-specific needs. As we showed you, Florida is in a unique situation, both demographically and in terms of the changes that are taking place over time in our aging population. We need to identify and reach vulnerable individuals as targets of interventions. Now, one of the, I think, a really important key point that was made is that you can be completely cognitively intact. This is not necessarily a sign of developing a dementia, that you can be a fully functional, independent living individual and be a target of financial exploitation. And we need to figure out what the different profiles are and how to develop screens that we can deliver for people to utilize for themselves. Development awareness programs to educate individuals in the areas where they're most at risk. So even individuals with cognitive impairment, and I'm a neuropsychologist, I'm a clinician, I interact with people almost day, I work with the elderly every day, and I can tell you that people with cognitive impairments are perfectly capable of learning. Maybe not with the same efficiency, but there's a lot that we can do with them and work with them. It doesn't have to be just with the people around them and taking care of them. It can be direct, hands-on work with an individual. Build support services and tools at risk for individuals to aid prevention. We talked a lot, actually all day today, about support services that are available. Remember to not focus on after the fact, but these services would be before the scamming takes place. Create educational and certification programs for professionals. So when we say professionals, we're meaning professionals at all levels: the attorneys, the police force, the nurses, the doctors, the primary caregivers, the general practitioners. People need to get well versed on all levels so that when a person goes for their yearly or their annual checkup, person will be the doctor that's evaluating them, their general practitioner will be keeping these things in mind, looking for vulnerable risk factors that an individual may present with, not just a cognitive impairment, but as we said, lonely individuals, people with negative affect. Those are people that are at risk for being exploited. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you if you have any questions. We're here to answer them. And I'm just going to go back up here. All right, come on.
Thank you. I wondered first if all the positive thinking was to Canadians, you had looked at it.
Well, we're Canadian, yeah. And then I'll apologize for it.
But then it seems to me we're talking about vulnerability, and now seniors are on social networks. If you think seniors cannot pick out fraud and financial and phishing, the misinterpretation and the buying into stuff that is not legitimate on social media is becoming a huge issue. It's becoming a political issue. We are the voting people, and the aging people are looking at information on social media that is bringing them to voting, and it is not appropriate information. So it's even bigger than you guys are talking about, so don't stop where you are now. Or do you agree?
So on the issue of disinformation and fake news, we think it's a related concept to other aspects of fraud and deception. And it is part of this broader program of research that we're in right now. We have pieces of how do older adults identify fake news? Is there a difference across the lifespan? And is that also tied to political behavior? So it's one piece of the broader questions that we're investigating. And it is extremely, extremely important at a societal level.
Yeah, I also wanted to add to this. I mean, a really good scam is good because it's so close to reality and they become better and better. And it's true with fake news and all these things as well. Like if they're really good, we cannot differentiate it, and even our brain might not pick up on those little differences. That's also why it's often very hard to study this, because you have to basically come up with something that's still, differentiable enough. But it's when it's full of typos and so on, we know right away that something is fishy, right? But if it's and that's the thing I was talking about, that as we go in technological development, these things become close to perfect, and it's harder and harder to detect them. That's why it's not going to be possible to just have an automatized approach or just burden everything on the individual. It has to be some sort of a combination where the machine helps the individual, but they're really informing each other to hopefully have a 100% correct decision in that very moment when it happens, when it's needed.
Voting is actually an area of interest of mine. And in 2000, I took off 3 months and analyzed every voting error in Dade County. If you remember with Bush v. Gore, there's a little problem with the Chads. What we found, and the reason this did not come out was because of 9/11, is that the problem was never with the Chads, it was who were voting, with people voting for 2. And the outrageous number of disqualified voters in settings that were largely African American and lower socioeconomic strata. What's important about that is that this increased awareness that something wasn't right out there. What really happened, we don't really know. It was a disaster, we know that. It wasn't really about that butterfly ballot where people couldn't really read it. There was something else. And so the take-home message with all of this is that everywhere you turn, you are at risk for misinformation. And getting information out there and working with individuals, people on the ground, training, priming you, so that, as we've all pointed out, is that the information grows over time. Your wisdom grows over time, so it is available. But it's the alerting mechanism that seems to be on the wane. So if you're primed to know this, like it's sitting here just having this discussion, each individual in here is getting the information. They have to be extra alert, that we have to be primed to be ready for it. And this is going to happen in voting.
Could we ask people to silence their cell phones?
Dr. Spring pointed out that the capacity to process negative information declines with aging. What are there any studies that look at the impact of alcohol, depression, or opioid painkillers on this capacity?
I don't know if data. Do you have data on that?
So I will tell you that huge numbers of Americans are taking too many meds. The average person coming into our clinic is taking 14 medications. So this is definitely having a dampening effect on alerting mechanisms, no question about it. Because when we test individuals, we can tell that they're slower, they're less reactive, based on our cognitive measures.
I do that. I don't have direct data. That's why we're all kind of looking up here. I think that's a really important question. Where I would come at it from maybe a slightly different angle, maybe a little bit following up on what Bonnie just said, is if you have alcohol dependence use disorder, or if you have opioid addiction or something, some other vulnerability, so I'm using those as categories of vulnerability, extra vulnerability. My general sense would be that that would interact with what's already going on in the normal aging trajectory and interact in a negative way, obviously. So, but I'm not aware of any studies. Natalie, did you? Yeah. It's a great question. It's really a good question.
So, I'm also not aware of. Is this working?
Yeah, I'm not aware of particular studies there. But I think what the point I want to make is that at this point still, unfortunately, a lot of the research we're presenting, because the field is still relatively young, is basically on these generally healthy, all the individuals who can make it into the lab, who are willing to participate in research. And really one call from our side would be to, we're hoping for collaborations where we get more chances at reaching out as double jeopardized individuals, for example, because it is hard as researchers to get access to these populations, and the processes might be either aggravated, or they might like more pronounced, or they might be completely different. And some of this we don't actually know how those things interact.
I have to ask this one last question, and then we're going to have to call it a day. But how can we know, in your views, when someone is vulnerable? So for us to go through our day and come across someone, is there anything that you've come across in your research that can help us identify people who have those vulnerabilities?
That's a good one.
Your list, Gary.
Yeah, that was number 10 on the list. And I'll jump in also. Yeah. No, you go ahead.
So, this is really one of the questions we're pursuing right now. So I think if there is a diagnosis, we can start going with that. But as we have heard many times now, this isn't often related to a diagnosis, and it wouldn't be a correct representation that there's always a dementia involved when the decision-making isn't going right. So really an approach of the funded work that we're pursuing right now is to try to get at some of those markers. It's not going to be one biomarker, or that would be fantastic. It's not going to happen. It's going to be a manifold of behavioral and self-reported factors that will play into this. But starting to look at this and identifying, and not just really taking this look at the individual and trying to understand how is this individual getting themselves into this place, and not just looking from the outside, but understanding what's happening in the decision-making process, I think is the first step to get at some of those answers.
So I would agree with that, and I would just add on that just two kind of extra points. So I think we are now starting to get, not on an individual basis, kind of this one individual A is at a certain risk level B, but this idea of someone who's socially isolated, for example, someone who may be health compromised in some other way. So now you're in a situation where you actually have additional anxiety and worry and things like that. The decision making in the moment is going to be compromised. So that idea, so if other things are going on that adding pressure and stress, that would be another kind of play. Not for everybody, this is not kind of that precision medicine, we're not there yet. But I think looking at the contextual factors are going to be not going to be critical. And then I think Bonnie brought this up in our discussions last evening, we were having some discussions. It's looking at where seniors might be most vulnerable, where older adults might be most vulnerable. And this idea of targeted areas where we had some on the list, I think, I'm not sure if you presented here, but those areas like, of course, healthcare would be one. And those areas, we were looking at kind of, what were some of the other examples?
Of where people are at risk.
Yeah, like kind of not just the person, but the place where they are vulnerable.
So, I want to say, I think everybody's vulnerable. That's the first thing. And I think you need to look at risk and protective factors to identify who in the end is going to be targeted. So for example, there are people who have some cognitive impairment, but they have great social support around them. And so those people might be less likely, even with their cognitive impairment. I'm working on a study now to predict who falls off the trajectory of healthy aging and who goes on to have successful aging. And we know, for example, that loneliness, that's associated with all kinds of negative health outcomes, but it may be that there are other things that offset loneliness, like great diet, lots of exercise, that compensate. So that's the same model for financial exploitation, is that there are risk and protective factors, and we need to actually understand both to really sort of hone in on, is this individual at risk? And by the way, medication, I do want to tell you, I think is hugely important to look at. Like if a person comes in who's on a lot of medication, who's under stress, who doesn't have good social support, who has some health-related problems, who's financially strapped, those are all red flags.